Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be hailing from. This is Red Hat Enterprise Linux Presents, and I'm your host, Eric the IT Guy Hendricks, and joining me pretty much every episode, except when he's not, is my favorite product manager, Mr. Brian Smith.
Hey, Eric, how's it going?
It's going good. I got to keep you on your toes. Always got to have some curveball to throw at you as we kick off. But this is episode number 62, and this is a callback to the episode that I didn't look up the number for, but we actually had Matthew Miller on about a year ago to talk about Fedora Linux, talk about the Fedora community, how that interacts with Red Hat Enterprise Linux, and how Red Hat and Fedora, who are sort of the same entity, but actually completely not at all. And it's so anyway, before I digress too far into that, go check out that episode. The links will be in the show notes after the live stream's over. But with that said, let's bring him in, Mr. Matthew Miller himself, the Fedora Project Lead for Fedora. Welcome
Hi
back.
there.
Hey, Matthew.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here. I think that with what you just said, I'm going to kick off with the what is Fedora exactly as an entity question.
Before we dive into that, though,
okay.
People got to know, who is Matthew Miller? Who is this Matthew Miller?
Sorry.
There's several.
There are several Matthew Millers. There's several even at Red Hat. I think but I'm this Matthew Miller. I am the Fedora project leader. I have been since about 9 years ago, so that's exciting. So I've been deeply involved with Fedora since its beginning in various ways, and now I get to work full-time on it, trying to make sure things go smoothly, or that when they don't go smoothly, they go unsmoothly in a way where we're all in it together, and that things stay positive. And it's sometimes in exciting times that's a challenge. Other times it's easy, but it's always rewarding.
Well, I'm looking forward to talking about Fedora Linux and the most recent release here in a few minutes, because there was some really good news and some really good technical achievements there, talking about keeping things positive and good times. But I could tell I triggered you a little bit when I said that Red Hat and Fedora are the same, but not the same. So for those that don't know, briefly, without sending them back to another Rel Presents episode, why don't you talk us through how that relationship looks like, just very briefly?
Yeah. So again, without going too far back into the where does the Fedora and Rel split way back at the dawn of time, somewhere around that time, there was talk about creating some sort of legal foundation, a Fedora Foundation entity there, and it turned out that there were some reasons that is difficult. So Red Hat owns the Fedora trademarks and pays a lot of people like me to work on Fedora, but Red Hat doesn't really own Fedora, and in some sense, there is no legal entity. There is no formal legal entity, but I was talking to Richard Fontana, who's one of the top lawyers in open source, and I will not put words in his mouth. But there's a concept of an unincorporated association of individuals in common law, which is basically the idea that there is a thing that exists that is Fedora, even if there's not like a legal document that says this is the government given charter for this entity. The entity Fedora really exists as a thing, and that's because of all of us coming together to work on Fedora. By working on it, we make the community that is Fedora, and that community is much bigger than Red Hat. The huge number of people who work on the project are not Red Hatters, and a lot of people who work on Fedora, as Red Hatters, either do it, part of their, it's not part of their job at all. It's just something that they're interested in, or it's part of their job, but not. They wouldn't need to do it in the Fedora community way that they do. Red Hat, that obviously there's a lot of things that Red Hat does intentionally that way, but people also go out of their way to be part of Fedora. That isn't just, oh, I'm Red Hat, therefore I'm part of Fedora. In fact, There is none of that. You can't get into the Fedora community just by being hired by Red Hat. You've got to earn it. So that's part of it. I don't know if that's. I hope that's interesting and useful, and not just my personal pedantry about the phrasing. But I think it's kind of important, really.
Yeah, and I think that was a really good overview. Matthew, can you talk a little about the relationship specifically between Fedora and Red Hat Enterprise Linux? Like,
yeah.
how does that work?
So, Red Hat Enterprise Linux is something, we call it a downstream. So Fedora is fast moving. Fedora Linux comes out every 6 months. We have a new release. And that doesn't mean you have to upgrade every 6 months. We have a cadence where you can skip a release. We have a 13-month cycle. So you can, once a year, there's an upgrade. But every 6 months, there's a lot of new stuff that comes in. And we found that that's a pretty good cadence for integrating all of this change that's coming from the thousands of upstream projects that are, we should have a count for this, but just the amount of lines of code that change in every release, it's astounding, and all of that comes in. And so a 6 months cadence is a pretty good way to integrate that. But for big enterprise software companies, a once a year major upgrade is kind of a lot to digest. So RHEL has a much longer life cycle. One of you RHEL people can tell me what the exact numbers are these days. But every 3 years, 10, 15, there's a whole, it keeps getting extended. As long as somebody will throw money at keeping their systems running forever, there's an extra secret extension life product, right?
I can neither confirm nor deny.
Right.
Been sworn to secrecy.
So anyways, every 3 years, and this is something that's kind of, I'm going to present it in the ideal sense because this is evolving and improving over time. It hasn't always been every 3 years, but that's the goal now. Every 3 years, a build from Fedora is going to fork into CentOS Stream, and then that CentOS Stream repository will be developed and tested, hardened, the RHEL process applied to it, and then from there go to a RHEL beta and then a RHEL release in the future, and then that repeats. So that's like basically in every 3 years splits off as Fedora continues on. There was a slide in one time I posted to the social media that was only RHEL is eternal, or only Fedora is eternal. Sorry, not only RHEL, which I thought was really nice. I misspoke on the punchline of that, but it's a very nice slide. We'll have to find it and attach it to this here. That kind of shows how everything branches off this ongoing community upstream that stream and then RHEL are derived from.
So, so the next thing I want to talk about is Fedora Linux, and we were talking about the release cadence. So Fedora Linux 38 was about 3 months ago now. Good grief. But we had a question that I wanted to address before we move in any further, and is that and that is, does Fedora pull in any telemetry?
Yeah, so this is referring to a fairly controversial change proposal that we just had. So I want to step back one bit there and talk about our change process, because Fedora works all in the open. There's no secret backroom. Yeah, in fact, secret backroom RHEL development would like to tell Fedora what to do sometimes, and that never works. It's just not the process, and we do everything in the open. And we've had issues with this in the past, just over the release schedule, where since our schedule was in the open, and when we do our testing and we want to make sure that things are ready to release before we release it, we kind of got the reputation for Fedora is always late, always delayed, because you make a schedule with the best intentions, and the best intentions in reality never lined up. So basically all projects in the world are either over budgeted in some way, or they are late. But that's just late. That's the natural state. And when something is developed in secret, a proprietary software or open source software where it's got a small team that isn't transparent with what they're doing, what you do is you don't tell people the actual release date until you know that it's ready to go. And this is what RHEL does. Although I think as RHEL and CentOS Stream become more open, the same problem may emerge. The release date, as you're more transparent, becomes there, and then when it's not ready, people start saying, "Oh no, you missed it. You're late. It's look how bad this is." But it's really just that process of transparency. You can see what's going on. That same adjusting the schedule happens in any project, and now we're doing it and people don't understand that by doing it in public, like it doesn't mean we're worse at it. We're just showing you how the sausage is made or whatever. There's probably some less Upton Sinclair metaphor for that.
Peeking behind the curtain.
I guess, yeah, something. So that's kind of the stage here for our change process as well, which is a policy by which anybody who wants to make Fedora better in some way is encouraged to submit that as a change for community discussion, and then big engineering changes are approved or not approved by our engineering steering committee. And so the desktop team at Red Hat, who works on the RHEL desktop and also on Fedora Workstation, and again, a lot of people at Red Hat putting in some really important work into Fedora that makes the desktop better for everybody. That is not their day job. It's some people's day job, but a lot of it is a labor of love. And some of the frustration is it's hard to know, should we keep targeting i386? Like, what architecture baseline is reasonable? What video cards do people, really tend to use out there? So a lot of information like that. And we've done some kind of survey things, data collection, but it's really hard to get really representative data in that way. So having something that does a better, broader survey seems pretty important to that team. So they looked at what Endless Computing, another Linux distribution company, had been doing. They have a little thing to do that. Ubuntu has for several years been collecting system information with a little dialog box at the beginning where it is a lot of the excitement is about the terminology opt-in, opt-out. It comes up with a dialog box where yes, please send information and improve the product goes to canonical. That's checked by default. You can switch it to no if you want. So the team looked at those kind of things and came to Fedora with a proposal. Hey, we would like to do this, and it is pretty minimal in what they are doing, in my estimation, and it explicitly says there will be no personal data collected, for example. So the word telemetry kind of gets it sets off a little bit of worries. You're like, are they watching my every move? What exactly is going to be recorded here? How I will be profiled for advertising and my data sold to data warehouses, and this proposal has none of that at all. It isn't even close, and the team doesn't want that. But they also I guess the expression "bless their hearts" I don't know, might apply here. No, wanted it to not sound like they were trying to hide something. So they said, right, we're going to say telemetry. We're going to use the strongest word because technically, there's telemetry. It's measuring something from a distance. So they use those words in the proposal, and which people are justifiably pretty worried about these days. And a lot of the internet and websites and software, work by collecting your personal data and like you are the product. That's not the interest here at all, but I understand how people, like you hear that and it's worrisome. So that plus one of the other big changes that I've been pushing is previously we used the Fedora Devel mailing list as the main point of discussion for all of this. Someone asked, is that bless their heart in Texas style? Maybe a little bit, yeah. That's what I'm saying. But we'd been having these conversations on our development mailing list, and that's fairly obscure, I'm going to feel safe in saying. People who are comfortable with open source projects and history, like mailing list culture and how to sign up for a mailing list to get involved in a discussion, is straightforward and people are used to it, but it's not really how people interact on the internet in general, and it's not how people new to software, new to open source. I think probably even most software developers, it's not their preferred way of working with things.
Mhm.
And so we have a discourse-based discussion forum, discussion.fedoraproject.org, and I proposed I'd like to move more of our conversations there because I think it's more accessible, more people can get involved. There are some better tools than a mailing list has for a lot of things. There are a lot of nice things that mailing lists have that people are used to, but I think overall it's a good change. So it happened that this was the first change proposal that we decided that would happen to go through this process. So there's some amount of be careful what you wish for, because we certainly did have a lot of engagement from a lot of new people showing up, and people who cared about Fedora, people who have been Fedora users but have never been really involved in the discussion before. We got a lot of that, which I appreciate. That that's what I wanted. On the other hand, a lot of those people really came in not understanding that this is our process of this is the proposal. We propose something and we talk about it and see how it works, and we make a good decision based on that. And so I think people were coming in with that same the schedule problem, where people were coming in assuming that the decision had been made. And on the internet today in general, one of the things you can do as a consumer when some company makes a dumb decision is you go to their site and you just get as much anger as possible and get as many comments and repeat yourself and make it loud. And because that maybe some schmuck intern has to read those comments, but nobody who's making a decision is actually reading that. So it's the volume of the force that's the measure. But that's not what we're doing. We are actually trying to have a conversation about this and how to make it better and what we want to do as a community. And so that was kind of hard to deal with and manage. So that's kind of the background here. I appreciate people who came in and got involved through there, and I hope that they do stay around and kind of understand the process. But I really think that, setting aside this particular thing, it's incredibly important that Fedora contributors, Fedora community members feel like it is a safe thing to propose any incredibly stupid idea they have. Because we need to have you got to have bad ideas in order to have good ideas. You got to have things that fail. You got to push the envelope. You've got to do things that are uncomfortable. So maybe, hopefully, we don't do too many of the stupid ideas, but we should probably do some of them, right? And we should definitely do some uncomfortable things. So if people start feeling like I can't have a discussion, or else the angry internet is going to rain down on us with anger, that would be unfortunate. So I hope that we don't have to do something to try and move these conversations to somewhere less public. So this is a really long way to get to the answer, which is I don't know what the outcome of this proposal is going to be. So the initial proposal, after getting a lot of feedback, is effectively withdrawn, and they're kind of going back to the table and presenting, going to take the feedback, engage with what the constructive comments, and there were a lot of them, and reshape it and try and see what else as proposed, it clearly wasn't acceptable. So can they make a proposal that does seem acceptable to the community and acceptable to the Fedora Engineering Steering Committee in particular, which is an elected body that makes the call on these things. Yeah, I don't know what will come back with that. I don't know, if maybe avoiding using the word telemetry is the right thing to do altogether. Steam's hardware survey is telemetry, but they don't call it that. Maybe we just call it hardware survey. I don't know. There are a bunch of different things we can look at, but we want to be transparent in all of it. And yeah, Fedora is never going to try and monetize user data. Fedora is never going to track people. We're not even going to track systems. We aren't going to do those things. It's not in our interests. It's not in our values. So that kind of thing is never going to happen. will we do something where we hope we can try and get a better sense of what our users are doing and what hardware is there? Yeah, I hope so, because we want to make decisions that benefit our users based on data and not just on feelings. Feelings are important, but they can lead you in the wrong direction. So we want to apply some science to it, and science needs data.
So, not realizing that this was the controversy that everyone was talking about in Matrix this morning,
One
I
of several
apologize for throwing my
controversies,
guest under
sorry.
the bus. And I wish Brian and I could relate, because Rel is loved by all, and no one ever has a negative thing to say about it. He
Right,
says
yeah.
sarcastically, so no one can use it as
I-
as a gift later.
I will not get into that, but I also think this is some of the what is the Red Hat Fedora relationship, and other things. There was certainly a lot of the IBM is ruining Fedora in the commentary, which I find particularly frustrating, because if we wanted to ruin Fedora, we could do it ourselves. But no, somebody in the comments there said they had plenty of bad ideas. No, IBM, there's not an IBM agenda pushing terrible decisions down anywhere, or good decisions. IBM just would like Red Hat to succeed, just like as an independent company, the stock market wanted Red Hat to succeed. So I get tired of it would actually be nice to just say, yep, sorry, dumb decisions. That was IBM again. But we're charting our own course, and we'll stick to that. But nonetheless, there is all of that out there. And so I think that honestly, if this exact same proposal, as it was, bad wording and everything, had come in, I don't know, a year ago, people wouldn't have blinked. And I think that not just, again, do you have data? I do have some data. That is, like I said, Canonical has been doing something like this for Ubuntu for several years.
And when that
And
came out, the community blew up for months.
A little bit, but not like they had when the Amazon thing was there, right? It was a little bit of like an upset, but people got over it, and they say 2/3 of people are selecting into it. It's still there, and I would like Fedora Linux to be the most popular distribution, but Ubuntu is still pretty popular. It has not actually destroyed them. People have mostly accepted that. Now, I don't think that's the baseline of I think this proposal, and any proposal Fedora is going to accept, is actually going to be much more transparent and privacy preserving than that system is. Like I said, that's our values. But I also don't think that this kind of thing is the end of the world.
Right.
So I think that partly the apocalyptic feel of the discussion came from people being frustrated with just everything. So
yeah. So now for something completely different. I've been around the Fedora community for several years now. I've used Fedora off and on for several decades. And actually, that kind of hurt the way I said that. Jeez, have I really been around Linux that long? But apparently, yeah. But now that I've derailed myself. But over the last year or so, I've seen the community grow. I've seen it expand. I've seen it gain momentum. And I'm not talking Fedora Linux, the bits and bytes. I'm talking about the people that are involved, the way that the organization, I use the term organization very, very loosely, the way that the community has come together. And I think that was really embodied in the most recent release with Fedora Linux 38, because I'm really excited to brag that the engineering team for Fedora did an awesome job. I was literally just idling in the release room chat room on Matrix, just watching, and there came this moment of, is that it? Did everything check out? Everything's green. Did we just release? So Matthew, why don't you share that story?
Right? That was the we've, as I said, we've got a transparent process where we kind of go through our schedule and decide if we are ready to go that week or if it needs to be moved to another week. And this was right before Red Hat Summit, right? I think that was the situation there, and everybody was pretty excited. The release was pretty good. We had a little bit of a delay, and then, but we were actually at. See, this is so long ago in Fedora years. It's like, what would me? Someone in the chat may need to correct me if I get my details wrong here. But this was actually at our. So as part of dealing with the people misunderstanding our schedule thing, we now have a public release date, which we highlight in bold, and then also an early target, which we internally try to hit, but never have actually, because we need that buffer. That's just how it works. It's like setting your clock 5 minutes ahead, so you're on time out the door. It's that we know it's there, but so it looked like we were going to have more delay. I was like, okay, it's we got time. Everybody, you don't need to like spend your Thursday and Friday like doing hero work to get this out the door, but it was so close, and so the people on the quality team and release team were like, we can do this, let's do it, and just kind of cranked through it in the last minute there, and so we actually released on the early target for once, which was exciting to see. Someone in the chat want to correct me, did I get that all right?
That feels right from my recollection too, and I think that was mid-April.
Yeah, something like that. Okay, I have a chat comment that came up here about the release cycle here, which I kind of talked about this before with the RHEL release cycle. So we definitely didn't copy Ubuntu. We had this first. I won't say if anybody's copying anybody, but I will say we had this first and we stuck to it. So one of the really important things about Fedora, in particular, Ubuntu, as they draw from Debian, has sort of some different constraints on things, but Fedora is I don't know what the word for this, an ancestor Linux distribution. Like we don't have another, a root distribution. Like there's not or what's the upstream metaphor? A spring, right? Of course, we gather all of the packages flowing into things, but the river starts with us. How about that? So in doing that, we actually one time decided we needed to work on our release engineering processes, and we stopped for a year to do it. And that actually turned out to be really hard because the amount of change that comes in a year is just like it ends up being more work than doing it twice a year. And this is intuitive if you think about it more. The least work way to do this is to have a rolling release where you don't actually have releases at all for release work for developers, where you just an update comes out, you push it out, there it goes, and just things kind of go continuously. But we don't want to do that because it's hard to put together the overall quality polish on that and have like the integration of everything working together. And also, with the fast-moving rolling release, you may wake up one morning and your desktop environment is all moved around, and you can either be like, I'm going to not take that update and then never get security updates, or you're like, well, I'm adjusting my workflow today. So having the release model lets us, that change is still coming from the upstreams, but it lets you as a user schedule it a little bit, and that's why we have that overlap. So if 6 months feels too fast for you, you can update at once every year instead and skip a release. And a lot of people do that. Another model people use is to actually follow not the latest, but the one that's 6 months back. It still gets security updates, but just the rate of change in that, like the exciting new stuff is going into the newer release usually. Yeah.
Well, and something we've seen with the RHEL release cadence over the last 4 years now has been that when you do a 6-month release, you're actually releasing a whole lot less. It's a much smaller footprint of code that's changed. And so when you do those minor release updates between 9.1 and 9.2, and here in a couple of months we'll be talking about 9.3, it's actually a much smaller footprint. In fact, Brian and I were kind of talking about some of the features that are coming out in 9.3, and don't worry, there's plenty of system roles that are being introduced or enhanced this fall. So Brian will have plenty to talk about, but it's much easier. And as a Fedora Linux end user, I have servers and a couple of laptops that all run Fedora. And one of the beautiful things about the release process is it is incredibly smooth. It has gotten so quick that it's like a long patch cycle now. And there's a couple of reboots involved, and that's about it, though. Just there's a couple of different commands. You run them. You do the upgrade. It reboots, changes a couple of things, reboots, and off you go again. Of course, then there's crazy people like me who installed the beta like 2 weeks after the beta was released. So,
Yeah.
what do I know?
I'm watching the chat going by, and I have more things. Neil Conan Kudo comments that we started with 6-month cadence back in 2003. I mean, that was in a lot of it is inherited from Red Hat Linux before that. So I don't know when that exact 6 months cadence settled in Red Hat, but it came, that was in the 90s. But then he also remarks that that was the target and that we kind of wobbled, and that's true too. Because for a while, the process was to set, once a release had come out, we would then say, okay, a release is out, let's develop the next 6-month schedule. And so that means if a release, slipped until, it was supposed to be in April, but it comes out in May, okay, then 6 months, the next one's going to be November, and then the next one's going to be in May, but it comes out in August. And then eventually you're just like, they become random. So we finally settled into let's make sure we stick to a actual release cadence. Like even if we go over, if one goes really long, the next release it's going to be short. And so we actually had a couple of those where it was like, well, that one took us 8.5 months, so let's get going real fast on this one. But again, then there's a little bit less change, so it kind of that worked out okay, and we kind of got into a good rhythm, especially with our former program manager Ben Cotton, who did an amazing job of like hitting that schedule like clockwork. So Ben's not dead, he just is not working for Red Hat anymore. He's still around Fedora too, and is no longer the program manager. Plug for his book though. Look, hey, wow, this is
So Matthew, later on this year we're going to have Fedora 39 coming out. Anything we should specifically look forward to? Anything you're excited about with Fedora 39?
Yeah. There's always a bunch of change. There's some an under the hood change that's going on that I'm worried about, but which will be interesting. So DNF is the package manager or the kind of meta package manager that brings together all of the RPMs and solves dependencies and does updates and things. There's a total rewrite of that, and that's going to go into place. And so it hopefully should be, for most people, not something you really notice, except for that things go faster. But it should also, once again, this was the promise last time, but have a better plugin architecture that will be the last further into the future until it gets all rewritten again from scratch, probably in Rust next time. But it should be a lot faster and have some nice new features that will be good. There's some interesting things using Btrfs as well to do faster RPM transactions using the copy on write features. So I think that's going to be cool. Less disk activity when updates happen, speeding things up. And one of the big, someone will need to check me on this. I think this is coming in 39, but it might have landed in 38 already. So Fedora includes all open source software by default. That is free and open source completely in the operating system. But we know people want to do other things sometimes, like play games, Steam. So one of the ways you can get that is through a third-party repository called FlatHub that has a bunch of Flatpaks. And previously, so we had gotten clearance to have a enable third-party repositories button that would turn that on, but it needed to be a specific vetted subset. And so we got legal clearance to make that be just enable FlatHub as it is. The subset thing was confusing to people. They couldn't see everything that they thought they should be able to see. So now it's just there. It's third party, and you can install it. So I think that is that's going to be exciting to people. Yeah, we're still in the process of getting change proposals. So I don't know. There might be something else exciting and dramatic coming up. But those are some of the big things I've seen going by. Neil
So-
tells me in the chat that it was done in 38. So I see.
That's why we bring people like Steven and Neil to these episodes, because they always correct us when we're wrong.
Anybody got anything else exciting on F39 that I should pitch here?
I know they're doing some work on the installer related to Cockpit. I'm not sure what part of that will be in 39, but I think that's coming at some point in the future.
Yeah, I'm not sure when that will land. Hopefully we can have some demos of some parts of it at least, right, where I have read a lot of reviews of Fedora Linux, and there are a couple reviewers who really love the installer, but most of those people are what we might call an exception. So, again, thank you, Neil. The Workstation Edition is going to have this by default in the live. It is a new user interface. Okay, this is a quote about the previous thing, right? I think, yeah. Are we following along properly here? I don't know. Making things up as we go along is part of the process. But
we threw the episode guide out like 20 minutes ago. So,
yeah. This is basically a much more streamlined UI, and it will use the same web-based widget system that Cockpit does, so it'll kind of look nice and familiar to go through the installer as the front end. And I think I think people will like it, but it is a little bit of a change. Change is always hard. Yeah, so right, the web UI installer is coming to F39 for Workstation, so that's going to be a pretty big change that people will notice. And
so yeah, lots of exciting stuff coming for sure. Yeah. So Matthew, so we have an event coming up. Can you talk a little bit about Flock? Like what is that? Where's it going to be?
Yeah, Flock to Fedora. So this is our annual contributor event, and this is the first time we're having it in person in 4 years. So it's in Cork, Ireland, which is a last-minute change because it was going to be in Detroit, but we discovered that the U.S.'s backlog in processing visas after COVID lockdowns was going to be like a year. So we were like, we've got to find somewhere else. So last minute change. There's been some amount of chaos, but I think it's all coming together nicely. It's going to be a little bit smaller, the first one back. I think last time we had 200 something people. It's going to be fewer than that this time, but it is going to be really nice to see people in person, and a lot of people from Red Hat and from the community outside of Red Hat are all going to be getting together to kind of talk about what we're doing, what Fedora is, and a lot to kind of just reestablish connections in person that help make things easier to work, virtually throughout the year. Yeah, I wish everybody could come. We had previously had Nest with Fedora, which is very cute. Flock to Fedora, and then we all were nesting at home together with a virtual event, which was an amazing virtual event. Marie Norden, it was a Fedora Community Action and Impact Coordinator role, kind of put those together and made them amazing. And we had like 1,000 people in attendance, made them really kind of big events. That was really energizing. And actually, I went to a bunch of virtual events during COVID, and most of them were not fun, to be honest. More draining. Now I've got a whole week of meetings in addition to my other stuff. But the Nest thing was really energizing and amazing. We decided we can't do both. I kind of wish we could have both the Flock and the Nest at the same time, but we don't have really the people, resources, and energy, at least this year, to do both. So we decided let's do the in-person. And I think it's gonna be fun. We have a lot of people talking about what they're doing, what they're working on, what their exciting ideas are. And getting together again in person to socialize and meet people, some new people to the community who haven't met in person ever, and we've never had anything like this in Ireland before, so that's a new place. So I'm very excited for it, and because we know everyone can't be there, we're not going to try and make it hybrid, because a lot of the value just honestly is the in-personness, and you can't hybrid to me means it's kind of a sham, because people in the remote I was at one hybrid event where there was a social thing, and everybody was talking and drinking wine and in place, and then up on the screen there were like 2 or 3 sad people just looking down, watching the fun, right? Like that's yeah. So I didn't want to hybrid like that, but we are going to make sure all the talks are recorded, and if the spirits of the internet are with us, will be live streamed as well, which, depending on where you are in the world, may not be so convenient, but the recordings will be there, and we can hopefully have people be able to at least follow what's going on that way. And I hope that we can find some ways to bring things to everybody who can't be there this year, so we can have some of that connection and planning as well, even if we don't have a Nest event. We do have release party events, which are online kind of 1-2 day things where we, after each release, where we celebrate what was there. And this is a little more user focused kind of thing, but they also are all really kind of big community come together online events. So we're going to keep doing those as well. So look forward to one of those in October or November, depending on schedules and things. I don't know. I would actually really love to be able to do a virtual event and an in-person event every year, but we'll need a bigger event team to really pull that off. So actually, anybody watching or listening who's has skills or wants to learn skills or just passion for organizing parties, come talk to us. We could use your help. I would love to build this up so that we can really have both of those events, especially since DevConf in Brno has apparently moved permanently to the summer. This is a great European event that was traditionally in the worst part of February, and Brno is a lovely town most of the times, but it is at its least lovely in February. So I can see why they wanted to move it to a different time. But it's unfortunate because we had beginning of August Flock and beginning of February DevConf event that kind of made nice, again, that 6 month cadence it's a nice cadence. So we had that's counterpoints, and now they don't fit together like that. So I don't know, maybe we will end up having, and Justin, who's the community architect, is going to be like, what are you, don't make promises, Matthew, but like I would love to have a February event, and if it's a virtual event, like a counterpoint, have February Nest and August Flock. I think that would be a good way to do things, but I'm totally in the speculation here.
But that does pull us into one of the questions we had earlier in the episode was, if I want to get involved, how do I start working with Fedora?
Yeah, so one of the biggest things that we've learned, and I think this is a good insight that Marie is wonderful, also had into how to help build community, is that like if you have technical skills and you like have a specific thing and you're good at just like, I can jump in and no matter what, I very stubborn and self-driven to get things done, like you can like find a code problem and go solve it. There's plenty of those, but that's not the easiest way to get involved, and it's not the way for everybody. And so I think the best way really is to actually come and hang out, come to the discussion forum and introduce yourself in one of the social threads. Start, maybe asking questions, answering questions on the help forum. That's a useful thing to do. But really just kind of hang out there on chat.fedoraproject.org, which is our instant messaging matrix thing. Say hello. Come to the Fedora Social Hour, which we hold almost every week, and just start to meet people and like see what the project is all about. Follow the Friends Foundation first, and then you kind of can get involved, and then you'll see a little bit what's going on, and then you say, oh yeah, I could help with this documentation, or I know about this, I could assist here, or this is exciting to me, here's somewhere where I can fit in. I think that's the way to get started. And we also have a Fedora Join team who then kind of when people are there and looking for something to do, can kind of help you guide you through the process and do some hand holding where things seem confusing, because it is a big, complicated project. So having that that help getting involved is useful. So Fedora Join is that team.
So having recently, I guess about 6-7 months ago now, sort of officially joined the Fedora project as a contributor, I've got to say that you will not be shunned. You will not be looked down upon. There's no RTFM when it comes to joining the Fedora community. People are incredibly helpful and really open to new people joining in on the conversation. So around April-ish, I helped relaunch the Fedora Project podcast. And so it was a lot of interacting with the marketing team, with the Mindshare team. And it's like, I don't have access to anything. What do I do? And finally, I think it might have been Mo kind of took me aside and go, don't worry about it. It's fine. We're all here to help. It's like starting another job, what you're trying to do here. So I can say firsthand that the community is incredibly welcoming. So don't let that outsider mentality keep you from getting engaged with some really amazing people.
Yeah, and I should also say we have a code of conduct. We try to strictly enforce it, and hopefully things don't even get to the level of code of conduct. But if you do at some point have a unwelcoming experience, something that doesn't go well, like tell me, tell somebody. If I'm the problem, tell my boss. Find someone to talk to about it, because we want it to be welcoming to everybody. That's extremely important. And if you have a bad experience, we would like to fix that. So tell us about it so we can.
So we had a question in the chat. Is using IRC a requirement of contributing to Fedora?
Yeah. No, it's not. And we actually have, so chat.fedoraproject.org uses Matrix, which is a somewhat more sophisticated end-to-end encrypted decentralized messaging thing. I think that's the right term, technical term. It's a little bit, there's some level of nerdiness involved even in this, but it's a lot less of the kind of deep lore that getting into IRC requires. I think it's a lot more accessible. And a lot of the really important activities in Fedora happen kind of in real-time things, where we have meetings that are like the decision meeting for this telemetry proposal. Like that happens, the engineering steering committee will come together in a real-time meeting and discuss it and vote, and that happens in Matrix IRC room that's bridged together. But you can visit and view that through Matrix. But there are a lot of people who who are part of the Fedora community who don't even delve into that side of things. They maybe just stay on a mailing list. Maybe they hang out on discourse, the discussion at fedoraproject.org, and that's kind of their communication platforms. So you don't have to, but that real-time platform kind of is the, I don't know, lifeblood in some ways, or the heartbeat. How about heartbeat? There we go. That's like of activity. So it's good to know that.
I'll just throw out too. There's also Fedora Magazine. I've personally written several articles for Fedora Magazine. Had a really good experience with that. So if you like to write, that's another area you can get involved as well.
If you like to design banner images for articles, I know that the editors have been doing this, but they are not actually artists. So they do a fine job of finding something, but it's not necessarily their favorite task. If someone would like to show up and be like, I'm going to make this magazine much prettier, your contributions would be welcome. And I don't mean to disparage at all the work the editors have been doing there. It's I'm glad we have graphics, but that's a hard task, and could use some help.
So we've got a few minutes left here. Is there anything you'd like to... Oh, gosh. I'm going to throw you under the bus again. Conan would like to know, what does Matthew Miller think of Fedora Onyx for Fedora 39?
Okay, we've got to stop giving things random mineral names, because so I believe this is the Budgie desktop. I believe with like 85% confidence that's the Budgie desktop. Am I right?
Yeah, I just Googled it, and that does look correct.
Awesome, thank you. Yes. So basically this is a Silverblue like OS tree deliverable using the Budgie desktop environment. Yeah, I think it's very cool that we have these. I think people who want to make something that has a different user interface, different environment, can come together and build that in Fedora rather than there's a there's kind of a thing where people are like I made a distro where they made a distro because they had one idea for reconfiguring the desktop, or they may have a new icon set, and then they're like, okay, I've forked the whole thing. And sure, you could do that, that's fun, but it's a lot of work to actually make a distro with the release cycle and security updates and all of the things. So Fedora is doing that. So if you have an idea for some way to, make it look cool in some way, or a new user interface, or some other different kind of technology, like you can come to Fedora and build a new spin that shapes it in the way you like, or takes some existing technology and puts it together in a nice polished way. I think that's cool. Yeah. I think I haven't ever actually used it. I've looked at screenshots. It looks pretty. I probably should try it out at some point.
To be fair, my desktops are either macOS or Fedora GNOME, and occasionally Neil talks me into running Plasma for a while. So there's tons of different spins, and then there's also a few desktop environment options that folks maintain as a community effort. But there are official spins that have different desktop environments in them, including I think i3. So if you're a tiling window guy, you can be or gal, you can do some i3 too. i3 also.
Yeah, there's a Mate Cinnamon. There's a bunch of different options. I don't Mate Campese. There's a cinnamon one. I'm not sure where I don't know if there's a cinnamon. Neil, I'm going to have to turn to you. Is there a mineral named OS tree cinnamon variant? We're gonna wait and see what happens.
Yeah, that's the only thing. They're about 7 seconds behind us.
There's also a discussion about PAG. No, there is not a OS tree one yet, but someone could make one. There's a discussion about GitLab and Pagure in the chat, which I find very interesting too. But I feel like that's probably more than the last 7 minutes of the show if we even broach that topic.
Well, what I'm hearing you say is that we need to have you on again here in a few months to talk about how Flock went, to talk about Fedora Linux 39, to talk about the GitLab migration, and maybe your preferred Fedora spins. Like, does Matthew Miller run Fedora Rawhide in production?
I used to, but every now and then I update some system to it. But all my systems right now are the current release. Except for my one that's running Fedora IoT, which I haven't updated in a long time. So I need to. I actually have a whole Home Assistant set up that I want to We were talking about Quadlet before the show. I want to redo it all with Quadlet, and I need to just redeploy everything there. So that would be.
Yeah, Eric, I think we should have a show like focusing on all the different Fedora, editions and versions, and cover an overview of all that, because there's so much really cool stuff out there, and so much stuff that can fit different needs. Really cool to see an overview of all of that, in one show.
People are saying nice things about me in the chat here. Thank you all. That's very nice. I'm flattered. Someone says, how can we pay to get the Pantheon desktop spin a reality? Which is an interesting thing. So I guess, the way you could pay to do that is find some consultants, or start a company that wants to do that. You could do it that way. Fedora doesn't take money where you don't rot. There isn't an entity that could take money to do something like that, and Red Hat doesn't do those kind of things. But there's no reason someone else couldn't do that. If you want to build a feature that way, that would be an interesting approach. generally the way we do things is try to sweet talk people into doing things. Maybe just a little bit of guilt and pulling for favors. I don't know, but yeah, usually it's. I'm sorry, that was getting a little punchy here after the hour. Really, what you want to do is inspire people. Why should somebody make the Pantheon desktop environment spin? Like, what's in it for them? What will they get back out of it? How will it make the world a better place? Like, how to do it? What you learn? It's fun. All of these things. Like, yeah, cool. Come get it. Get people excited about it. Like, this is the best desktop environment we wanted to take over the world. So of course there needs to be a Fedora flavor of it. Those kind of things. Build those things. And that's how you get it done. GoFundMe, somebody says. Sure, I'd love to see that experiment.
So Brian, you're talking about a show with content about all the different spins and all the different features and functionality of Fedora. What I'm hearing is we need to have like a Fedora podcast.
Yeah, that'd be cool. Yeah,
maybe interesting.
Now we just got to find some guy to host the thing and someone who's not camera shy, maybe has really good hair. Sorry, Brian, that rules you out. Whereas Brian and I are being facetious because we're on a bit of a break for the summer. Life got very lifey there for a bit for me, but we've got the Fedora podcast up and running again. We had 3 or 4 episodes around April, May, and then Summit, and then things fell apart for me at least. So we are looking at kicking the program back on, the podcast back off here in just a few weeks. We're talking to a few hardware vendors who shall as yet remain unnamed. But if you buy Fedora hardware, you probably know who I'm talking about. But we're going to try and get someone from a couple of hardware vendors to come on a couple of episodes of the show and talk about what it's like to run Fedora natively on hardware, to go out and not see the Windows logo, but actually see the Fedora Linux logo instead. So we've got some awesome episodes coming up just a few weeks. I've got some PTO, and then I'm traveling back to Red Hat Tower for a few days over the next 2 weeks. So after that, we are kicking the Fedora podcast back off, and hopefully I'll be able to maintain a good cadence now that once we have that episode, the kids will be back in school, which, let's be honest, was a lot of the lifiness. But yeah, really excited to have the Fedora podcast going. And yes, that's a shameless plug because I'm one of the hosts, but really excited for that.
I think that seems like an acceptable plug given the topic of the episode here. And someone asks, where do people watch it? Where should they go? How do they find it?
So unlike the show, there is actually an audio component to the Fedora podcast. So there's not as many demos or anything live. We haven't figured out how to do that with an audio podcast to send a visual to someone's ears. If we figure that out, definitely. But you can catch the audio version of the podcast on just about any podcast player, whether it's Apple, Google. Some people use like some kind of poll right off the website, like some kind of local, I forget what the app is, Rhythmbox or something like that, as well as Overcast and a whole bunch of others. And then you can also catch it on the Fedora YouTube channels. So we added a video component earlier this year. So you can come see, actually one of the first episodes with Matthew and myself talking about Fedora Linux 38. So you can come see our smiling faces talk about Fedora Linux and how awesome it is. But anywhere else you'd like to send folks, Matthew?
If anybody wants to show up last minute to Flock, registration's still open. That would be amazing. Travel to Cork. And come Fedora discussion. Go find the social. It's called the Water Cooler. Find the Water Cooler. Introduce yourself in the introductions thread, or go to chat and find the introductions room in the Fedora space. Say hi. I think that's the best thing.
So you were talking about paying for my flight, right?
Talk to me after.
All right, folks. That'll do it for today's episode of Red Hat Enterprise Linux Presents. I'm going to go take a nap before my next meeting. It's been a busy week. But thank you all for tuning in. Matthew, thank you so much for being our guest today. Really enjoy sitting down and chatting with you. Actually, we need to have some kind of post-show hangout, because like the pre-show conversations are usually better than the content itself. So you never know what we end up talking about. Today it was Quadlet and Home Assistant and RHEL 9.3. So you never know. But thank you for joining us.
Yeah.
Really appreciate it, Brian. Appreciate you being my co-host.
Thanks, Matthew. Thanks, Eric.
Thank you, audience. You were wonderful.
So no Into the Terminal this week. Nate and I are both off this week, this Friday. So Scott didn't feel like being all alone. So no Into the Terminal. Next Tuesday we're going to continue our Red Hat. We'll continue our RHEL Presents mini-series around modernizing RHEL management, talking about Red Hat Enterprise Linux and Red Hat Insights side by side. That'll be episode 2. We're going to be talking about building images using the hybrid cloud console. And then next Friday, we promised we'd wrap up our packaging arc on Into the Terminal, but we changed our minds. We decided that we needed to have an episode about Flatpak before we wrapped up the story arc. So the next couple episodes will be about Flatpak and then troubleshooting containerized applications once Nate's back in the office. Nate quit taking days off on Fridays. But on behalf of our guest, Matthew Miller, my co-host, Brian Smith, myself, Eric, the IT guy, and the entire Red Hat Enterprise Linux and Fedora community teams, thank you all so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.